Picture this. It's the summer of 2025, and the very foundations of international stability are literally shaking. We're talking about a moment where long-simmering regional tensions suddenly boiled over into a full-blown military escalation, pulling in the world's most heavily armed powers. It was a month that completely redrew the geopolitical map. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the direct sources and data to trace exactly how an ideological rivalry reached the absolute brink of nuclear catastrophe. It's really one of modern history's most fascinating and honestly terrifying paradoxes. When you look at the landscape today, which is entirely defined by preemptive airstrikes, bunker buster bombs, and existential threats, it is almost impossible to believe that these two nations used to be deeply connected. So, how exactly did two covert allies transform into bitter adversaries, holding the entire global order hostage? Let's start with Section 1, the 2025 flashpoint. This escalation happened at lightning speed. It all kicked off in 2025 when US President Donald Trump issued a strict 60-day deadline for Iran to renegotiate their nuclear deal. Well, Iran didn't come to the table, and when that deadline expired, the reaction was incredibly swift. On June 13th, Israel launched preemptive airstrikes straight into the Iranian capital of Tehran, an intense campaign known as Operation Rising Lion. They took out nuclear sites and top Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders. Immediately after that, the United States jumped into the fray to back up its ally. We're talking B-2 stealth bombers dropping bunker buster bombs and Tomahawk cruise missiles squarely on Iran's key underground nuclear facilities at Natanz, Esfahan, and Fordow. That brings us to Section 2, From Allies to Enemies. Now, to truly grasp why 2025 went down the way it did, we really have to rewind the clock. The regional dynamics here have shifted wildly over the decades. You start with the creation of Israel in 1948, move to the absolutely crucial 1967 Six-Day War, and then hit a massive turning point, the 1979 Islamic Revolution in Iran. Decades later, the 2015 nuclear deal tried to cool those boiling tensions, but ultimately faltered, leading us right up to the 2025 nuclear crisis. It sounds crazy today, but get this. Back in 1967, during the Six-Day War, most Arab nations were aggressively boycotting Israel. But Iran? Iran actually supported them. It was a secret friendship. They were the only regional power supplying Israel with vital crude oil, and in exchange, they got advanced agricultural and technological assistance. They were practically partners. But then, flip over to 1979. The Islamic Revolution completely flips the script. The Iranian monarchy is overthrown, and the new supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, declares Israel an illegitimate state. Overnight, that relationship shifted from economic cooperation to fierce ideological hatred. Moving on to Section 3, the proxy and cyber wars. For decades after 1979, both nations actually avoided direct warfare. Instead, Iran basically built a geographic ring around Israel. They did this by funding, arming, and directing a really complex web of non-state proxy groups. You've got Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah up in Lebanon to the north, the Houthis down in Yemen to the south, plus various militias scattered across Iraq and Syria. Iran's whole strategy was to project power right onto Israel's borders, without ever triggering a direct state-on-state war. But here's the thing. The battlefield isn't just physical anymore, it is completely invisible. 20,000. According to Iran's own Minister of Communications, that is the staggering number of cyber attacks executed by Israel on Iran during the recent conflict. And Israel's intelligence agency, Mossad, orchestrated some incredibly sophisticated operations here. They were using fake phone calls and purposely planted information leaks to literally lure Iranian intelligence heads and IRGC commanders into pre-planned assassination sites. They were crippling the leadership from the inside out. Let's look at Section 4, the nuclear ambitions crisis. The core trigger, the existential threat that escalated this proxy war into a global flashpoint, centers right around the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA. This was the world's attempt to rein in Iran's nuclear program, and the terms were super specific. Iran agreed to limit its uranium enrichment to just 3.67%. For context, you need about 90% for a weapon. They also agreed to drastically slash their enriched uranium stockpile from 10,000 kilograms down to a mere 300 kilograms. And in exchange, crippling international sanctions would finally be lifted. So, why did this landmark deal fall apart? Well, in 2018, the United States officially withdrew from the JCPOA. The primary criticism at the time was that the agreement ignored two massive loopholes: Iran's advancing ballistic missile program and its continued funding of proxy terrorism all across the Middle East. The argument was basically that lifting those sanctions just ended up funding the very militant groups encircling Israel, which ultimately prompted Iran to abandon its nuclear limits altogether later on. Section 5. The Global Chessboard. As you've probably guessed, this regional dispute transformed into a massive multilateral standoff really quickly. On one side, you have the West, the US, UK, France, and Germany. Their focus in the region is heavily rooted in security. They're acting as protectors trying to deter nuclear proliferation. On the flip side, you have the East, primarily Russia and China. Their involvement is vastly different. It's heavily focused on economics. Russia is exporting drones to Iran and developing shared energy projects, while China is viewing the entire region through the lens of its massive global trade networks. 90%! That is a wild statistic. China purchases a massive 90% of all Iranian oil exports. This single economic reality makes China an absolutely essential geopolitical negotiator in this crisis. They strongly advocate for non-interference and de-escalation simply because a full-scale war would absolutely devastate their energy supplies and completely disrupt their multi-billion-dollar transcontinental Belt and Road Initiative. Which brings us to our final section, Section 6, A Fragile World Order. Now, you might be wondering, why does this matter to me? Well, because the shockwaves reach way, way beyond the Middle East. 900. During the peak of this recent conflict, over 900 commercial ships suddenly lost their GPS signals while navigating the Strait of Hormuz. Just imagine navigating that blind. It completely illustrates the terrifying vulnerability of our global infrastructure. A localized military escalation immediately choked off one of the world's most critical shipping lanes, throwing international logistics into absolute chaos. And the financial impact? It was immediate. As the conflict raged, liquefied natural gas prices in Asia spiked from $12.6 to $14 per MMBTU. At the exact same time, global gold prices surged by 1.2% as investors panicked and looked for safe havens. The cost of basic, everyday commodities like copper and iron just shot up due to the transport risks. So, this isn't just distant political theory, folks. It's a direct hit to the global economy. What we are ultimately looking at here is a giant, incredibly complex puzzle. It weaves together ancient historical claims, fierce religious ideology, asymmetric proxy warfare, and literally the survival of global economic trade routes. The 2025 escalation proved, without a doubt, that the Iran-Israel conflict is no longer just some isolated regional dispute. It is a crisis that threatens the balance of the entire world.